Remember when you started your first commercial airline? When you negotiated the purchase of a fleet of aircraft with Airbus for hundreds of millions of dollars? When you secured facilities like hangars, maintenance facilities, and office space, and hired qualified personnel, including pilots, cabin crew, mechanics, and administrative staff? When you obtained necessary licenses and permits from aviation authorities and secured insurance coverage for aircraft liability and other operational risks? When you established procedures for ticketing, reservation, scheduling, and customer service, and built a strong brand identity while engaging in marketing campaigns to attract customers to ensure profitability? I think you get what I'm driving at. Creating a commercial airline is incredibly hard. But what does that have to do with anything? Well, our guest today, David Neeleman, has founded not one, but 5 commercial airlines, including JetBlue, WestJet, the second largest airline in Canada, Azul Airlines, Brazil's fastest growing airline, and most recently, Breeze Airways in the United States. He was even listed by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2004. Neeleman credits so much of what he's been able to accomplish in his career to the 2 years he spent serving his mission in Recife, Brazil, from 1978 to 80, where he's previously said, in part, quote, "My mission saved me. It was the first time in my life that I ever felt like I had some talent. It was, quote, the defining moment in my life that put me on the path to success." In this episode, my friend and current Elders Quorum president in my ward, also a former Brazilian missionary, joins me to talk with David about the great impact of Azul Airlines in Brazil, past failures introducing new opportunities for success, viewing poverty firsthand as a missionary and resolving to make a difference, the Christ-like attribute of regarding all people equally, and a whole lot more. I think you're going to like this one. Coming up next.
Well, we're starting to fly to Dallas, and then Frontier added flights, and everyone's matching the fares, so you have no excuse not.
Oh, did Frontier add flights into Dallas, huh?
3 days a week, and then we do it from Provo. Then American added Provo, but
Are you kidding me?
Not till October, and it's a lot higher fare. And then Frontier added 3 flights, and so fares are pretty cheap. So,
Hey, you got a bunch of copycats. I was just going to tell you, I just bought my Thanksgiving home tickets on Breeze, my first Breeze flights. So flying into Provo.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think I got it round trip for $500 something bucks. And I didn't see the other airlines and the competitors into Salt Lake around that time is $800 bucks. It's 400 tickets. So works great for me, man. I'm thrilled about that.
That's good. Thanks for the business.
Yeah. That's the least I could do.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have more. Like my son's in the Provo area too. And when I saw the flights, I'm like, hey, you don't have to drive to Salt Lake and drop off the car at your aunt and uncle's house and then get a ride into the airport. I go, you can just go right there. It's perfect.
Friday morning, back Monday morning. It's easy.
That's right.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah. So David, in your case, you've kind of had a life where you've accomplished a lot more quote unquote big things than the standard person has in that you've launched a bunch of airlines, taken companies public. You were listed in a Times list as a 100 most influential people or something to that effect. So you've done a lot of really amazing, you had a lot of really amazing professional accomplishments. And I'm curious, as you look back on your career to this point, if there's anything that stands out to you as something that's been most meaningful that you've accomplished.
Yeah, I've had success. The airline business is not always good to people, but it's been good to me. Starting from the time I dropped out of college, got in the travel business, started my first airline that I sold to Southwest, and then started my second airline, WestJet, which is today the second largest airline in Canada. And then the one kind of probably in the US I'm most known for is JetBlue. And that was great. But I think the most important thing I've ever done and the thing that affected the most people and changed their lives the most is Azul in Brazil. It's the largest airline in Brazil. We have 16,000 people that work for us directly and another probably 24,000 indirectly. We fly 100,000 people a day. We deliver 150,000 packages a day to people who order stuff online. And we've probably taken maybe half of the people that work for us out of maybe low income or even a poverty situation. And that all came about because of my association with Brazil. because of the missionary program. So it's by far the most meaningful thing that I've done.
No, that really resonates with me. I served my mission from 1997 to 1999 in Guyana. And I remember I would go with the mission president to pick up the missionaries. And I remember at that time looking at the boards and thinking, there are not a lot of flights to a lot of places here. Everything went through Sao Paulo. And it was just, I remember even back then, and I have no connection to the airline industry, but yeah, I can see where that would make a massive difference to a lot of people in Brazil.
And when we started Azul, there were about 47 million people that traveled domestically in the U.S. In Brazil, sorry. In Brazil. In the U.S., it was 650 million. And that number today is double. It's over 100 million
Wow.
people. And most of those additional incremental flyers are flown by Azul in Brazil. We serve 170 cities. We serve over 100 cities that nobody else serves, where there's no service. 18 cities in the Amazon basin. If it wasn't for us serving those flights, it's either a flight on Azul or a 5-day boat ride. So we bring life-saving medicines, and we move a lot of organs for organ transplants and vaccines and all the things that people need to become healthier. And that service just did not exist before we started. Probably the most important, I think, company that started in Brazil in the last 15 years, particularly during COVID and all the things we did to kind of help out. Even now with the flooding in southern Brazil, we've flown 150 relief flights down. We rallied when the church obviously gave us a bunch of supplies that we could move, and participated, and Shell and a lot of other different people contributed, but we were the catalyst of making all that happen.
Yeah,
That's amazing. It's so cool that you're in a position that you have been able to affect that many lives. It's not common that people are in that position, but to do that is
Yeah,
amazing.
it's a great blessing. It's interesting because the CEO of Azul today is somebody who I took with me from JetBlue to start the airline down there. And he was our CFO at the time. Now he's become the CEO. I'm the chairman. But he served his mission in Portugal. So because he had that Portuguese language
Oh, wow.
expertise, that's why I selected him. And now his son is on a mission in Porto Alegre and is kind of leading the relief efforts down there. A lot of pictures of him.
That's awesome.
He was with the president of Brazil's wife down there, and coordinating, got missionaries to all go to the airport to help unload these relief flights and get the supplies to the people who needed them. So John Rogerson has lived down there for 16 years, and now his kids have been raised there, and they're serving missions there. So it's a really cool story.
That's super awesome. Yeah. So something that when I was kind of getting ready for this, you've had a ton of success, right? Azul obviously is a huge success, and it brought all of these amazing benefits to the people in Brazil, broadly speaking. But you've had some pretty spectacular, if I can say it in a nice way, like kind of failures, right? So
Sure.
the Hawaiian travel business or the Southwest. I do think it's funny that you got kicked out of Southwest because you were too good. That's what I took away from all the
Yeah.
things I've read about
Yeah.
it, which is funny. But Southwest or even the JetBlue issues. So just curious from your end, all these failures are learning opportunities. So what are some of the lessons that you took away from those experiences that you've applied?
Well, basically, I was at Southwest, and I worked really hard to get them to do e-ticketless, e-travel. That they didn't have that. I was able to integrate the airline. I got to convince them to stop charging off-peak fares on Sundays, which saved them $50 million a year. I did a lot of things there. I was only there 6 months, but Herb Kelleher said, you should have taken a couple of years to do that. You kind of made everybody mad because we've always thought we were the best, and we didn't think that we needed improvement. And you kind of pointed out some areas that we did. So that was an interesting experience, but I can still remember Herb took me over to Ruth Chris Steakhouse by Love Field and said, it's not going to work. And I flew home, and I was obviously disappointed and sad, but WestJet probably wouldn't be around today, and JetBlue certainly wouldn't be around today if it wasn't for that experience. And then I had kind of my falling out with the board at JetBlue, and they obviously misinterpreted things and were not close enough to it, and obviously think they made a big mistake. But Azul would not exist without that. And so the thing that I'm most proud of is Azul, and Azul wouldn't exist without that. When I left the company, and I was actually on the board. I was the chairman of the board, but I wasn't happy with the way things were handled. I wrote an email to all of our people at the company, and there was probably at that time 8,000 people. And I just said, look, I've always taught you that it's not really what happens to you in life, it's how you deal with it and how you're able to turn the page and make something good out of something that happens bad. And I was born in Brazil. I served a mission in Brazil. I have love for the people, and I've always when I was a 18-year-old, a 19-year-old boy, or 20-year-old boy walking through the streets of Brazil, I always thought it would be so cool to come back here and make an impact. And so this is my opportunity to do so. And so I'm going to try and make something great from something that I disagree with, that's a bad decision, but Azul happened because of that. So I think the lesson is you can always have something good come from something bad. It's just, it doesn't matter what happens to you. It's really how you deal with it and what your attitude is.
I love the perspective that, like you said, the best thing you've ever done is Azul. And none of that would have happened if all of those things, those other things hadn't happened necessarily.
Right. I got a bunch of people at Breeze saying, this is next. This will be the next best thing you ever do. So, or we'll have to take its place. So, but till now, Azul was pretty spectacular.
You almost need those little points of failure to punctuate change in new direction, and you get stagnant and stale maybe without some of those larger quote unquote failure experiences that have now bred so many new opportunities.
Absolutely. We learn in the scriptures, and we learn that there has to be opposition in all things, and that's how you grow, is from trials and difficulties in our lives. And I'm not one that prays for that. I know some people are like, life's going too good, I'm praying for tragedy. And I'm like, no, I don't do that. I don't want any. But things are going to come our way, and we need to be able to know how to deal with it and be positive, rely on the Lord, and things just seem to work out.
I've always thought that having experiences in failure and on the mission, because that's what it is. And for a lot of the time, it feels like an exercise in futility, right? And having that many experiences to fail, I think is so valuable to a young kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, anyway, one of the questions I was going to ask you, there's elements of luck in any kind of success, but there's also hard work. Lots of times creates a climate in which you kind of make your own luck. But I'm curious, as you trace back the history of your professional career, what are some things that you feel that you did that were most beneficial to your career success?
I think realizing my strengths, my weaknesses, and surrounding myself with people who complement my weaknesses, and kind of giving credit to other people and doing it as a team, as opposed to trying to do things on your own. And then just looking outside the box and saying, can we do this differently than everyone else is doing it? Why do we do things a certain way? And I think that's why I've had success in the airline business. It's an industry that is kind of mired in certain tradition. Mm-hmm. So I just try and look at things differently, and then surround myself with people who can complement my weaknesses and to help implement those things.
So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on leadership and leadership styles. I mean, I've been fortunate to see leaders in a lot of different industries over my career. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you have some that are super passionate or compassionate, and some are cold, right? They may call it, it's all business, right? Curious kind of what your style is and who your biggest role model was or is that helped you get to that point.
I was a big fan of Herb Kelleher. Even though he fired me, he was somebody who cared about people. People looked up to him. They followed him. He was someone who built a great company culture. And so I was enamored and in love with Southwest before they even acquired us. And so I think I would probably classify him as my top mentor. Had the opportunity to be at his funeral and pay last respects to him. He was really a great man. But I'd like to categorize myself as kind of a servant leader. With all the turmoil in the U.S. job market, it's a lot harder today to necessarily be the best job you've ever had, and because people seem to be just a little more discontent. But in Brazil, the reason I'm so in love with what we did down there is we had this thing we would teach and ask people, is this the best job you've ever had? And if it isn't, why not? And so just walking around the company saying, is this the best job you've ever had? What can we do better? Just always that striving for perfection, always striving to be better, knowing that we'll never reach perfection, but at least if we strive for it, we'll be a better and better company. And so I think that's this motto is It's really make it a great job for people. If they believe it's the best job they've ever had, if they're grateful for their job, then they'll just do a better job. Our turnover in Brazil is almost zero. If you get a job at Azul, you never leave, be it a flight attendant, a pilot, mechanic, interview or other positions like call center and all that. So we treat people really well. And so you want to be able to create a culture where people not only see it as a job, but they see it as a kind of a cause, a passion. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to sustain, but that's what I've tried to do as I've built my companies.
Just a funny story. Years and years ago, I had read an article about a CEO who on their planes would get on the plane and help out and serve. And I read this years ago, and it wasn't until I was getting ready for this that I found it again. I thought, this is the guy that I read about all those years ago. But it struck, even back then, I remember thinking, that's the way you want to serve your customers and the people that work with you. Like, that's the way to do it. Go and be with them. Get down there, talk to them. Don't be the person in the C-suite that you never see. Just go talk to people, right? Ask them what they want, what they need, what makes them happy, what's fulfilling, what needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I mean,
and it was always something that stuck with me.
I always thought it was comical, that show, Undercover CEO. It's like I could never go undercover, no matter what kind of costume I had, because everybody knew who I was. And, you try and lead by example as the best you can. And you try and be down there where the action is, where the money's being made and where people are really serving people. That's really what I've kind of strived to do. And it was kind of a culture that we set up.
So you interact with executives at other companies, and do you feel like other executives have a similar approach and mindset, even if it's not as well manifest in their company?
I think so. I mean, I think today, especially in the US with the job market the way it is, people can kind of go work anywhere. So if you don't figure out a way to take care of your people,
the market will take care of that, won't it?
You have these unions at airlines and they try and tell you what to do. So I don't need you to tell me how to take care of our pilots because they can go get a job anywhere and they can leave us. And so that. And so you strive to be the best.
Going to the mission experience a little bit, I heard you talk about with Guy Raz about going on your mission. You said, is this something that you kind of did, right? It's an expectation. I know it still is culturally familial. That's just kind of what we do in the church. And I'm curious, what did you think you were going to get into before going? Was there any thought beforehand that it's going to be this certain kind of way? Or was it just blindly, I'm going to go and whatever happens, happens kind of thing?
All of us that serve missions know for sure that it's not exactly like we thought it was going to be. It tends to be much different. And, I just kind of step back a generation. My father, a couple generations, my great-grandfather was converted to the church in Holland, and he immigrated to Utah with his family. And through a series of events, they didn't stick with it, the church, and he ended up moving to California. And my grandfather was born in Salt Lake City, and he had 5 sisters that were born in Holland, and he was born in Salt Lake, but he wasn't raised in the church. So when he ended up marrying my grandma, who was a member, but he wasn't a member, and he'd never been baptized. So my father was 9 years old when my grandfather drove down to LA, down to California to visit his grandfather, as he was kind of failing in health. And great-grandfather Simon Peter pulled out a worn copy of the Book of Mormon and said, I've been hard-hearted. We're Dutch, so obviously that comes with the territory. I've been stubborn. I want you to go home, and I want you to both get baptized. And he died shortly thereafter. So my grandfather did as his father asked him. He drove back to Utah, and my father and my grandfather were baptized on the same day. My dad was 9 years old. But because he wasn't raised in the church and he didn't really attend that much, and it wasn't until my dad was kicked out of primary for being kind of unruly, and it wasn't until my dad met my mom that he kind of started going again and started to really feel the Spirit and thought it was important. And kind of on his own, he decided that he wanted to serve a mission. And this was in the early 50s. He graduated from high school in 52, so this is probably like 1953, 54. And so he went to my mom and said, I want to serve a mission. And she said, well, geez, I wanted you to get back in the church, but I wasn't sure I wanted you to go that far. So my father got called on a mission, and as fate or not luck, but, inspiration would have it, he was called to Brazil. Didn't even know where Brazil was. And so he always joked that they invented planes while he was gone because he went down by ship from New York, and then
Oh my
he
gosh.
flew home. But that experience changed his life. And it was a 2.5-year mission, and he actually extended for 3 more months. My mom's like, "Are you kidding me? Are you out of here?" And so they came home. My dad came home and they got married. And the first thing my dad said as he got off the airplane was, "I want to go back to Brazil. I want to be there. I want to go back and be with those people." So he got a job as a foreign correspondent for United Press International and had the opportunity to go back there. And we lived there for 7 years. And it was during that 7-year period of time. I was born there in 1959. And so I have citizenship of Brazil because I was born there. And then we moved back to the US, and I was only 5 years old. And so Portuguese was my first language, but because I was too young, we kind of lost the language, and my mom and dad claim they tried to keep it up in the house, but weren't successful. So then I was called back to Brazil because I had I think because I had a Brazilian passport. And visas were kind of hard to come by at those times. But it was interesting because as an expatriate kid, and then we would go back and visit, my dad had lots of friends there. And my dad had a great career down there as a journalist. He interviewed Fidel Castro. He was there when Brazil was kind of deciding which side to go with Argentina, or if they were going to go into communism, or they were going to go with Cuba,
Yeah.
and he had just
So he stayed busy. Your dad stayed busy.
Yeah, he has written a whole book about the experience. He's written several books about Brazil, but one of them he talked about his life as a correspondent. But when I was a teenager going to Brazil, I thought, wow, this place is better than the United States, because we were kind of lower middle class living in the US. We'd go to Brazil and beautiful beaches and eat at the finest restaurants and go to these sports clubs and hang out with all our rich friends. But then when I was called back to Brazil, that wasn't my experience at all. I was in the favelas. I was walking the streets. All those rich people that I knew didn't want to hear anything about the gospel. They were behind the walls, and I was out with the O Povão, the people. And it really upset me. I felt like I thought we should, I can see why people want to overthrow governments and where socialism comes in, because we have the haves and the have-nots. And there were maybe 20 million people that were haves, and the rest at that time there were 110, 120 million people in Brazil. Most of them, 80%, were have-nots. And so that was when I kind of resolved to go back and do something for Brazil. But the other thing about my experience as a missionary, one of the things I learned later in life when I was in my early 30s after I sold Morris Air to Southwest Airlines, my mom sent me this book, and the book was called Driven to Distraction, and it was written by a guy named Ned Hallowell, who's kind of the foremost expert on attention deficit disorder. He's written several books. His latest book is ADHD 2.0. And I couldn't read the book because I never read anything all the way through, but I did read the characteristics of someone with ADD, and I was like, wow, it was a huge revelation. And so as I think back, in high school, I was a horrible student. I could barely get through high school. I scored really low on the ACT. I got into the University of Utah just because it was a state school and they'd let anybody in at the time. Did poorly in school. And then I went on my mission, and that completely changed me. My mission taught me how to focus. It taught me how to be disciplined. It taught me how to be successful. I'd never really done anything really successful in my life. I had leadership positions on my mission. I had a lot of success converting people. And so between that experience of seeing these really poor people and not totally thrilled how they were being treated, but also that they were happy and they were content with very little, and just me changing myself from being more disciplined and having a relationship with the Savior, I think I can attribute all the successes of my life to those 2 years walking those dusty streets in northeastern Brazil. I shudder to think what I would have become had I not gone on a mission. It really did make me a different person, a better person, somebody who could be successful as a father, but also as a business leader and everything, because I learned to be egalitarian. I learned to really think about others like we were taught to do as missionaries.
I feel like on my mission, that's where I really started to understand the term Christ-like love, right? As you looked around at different people who are completely different from me, right? And the people I grew up around, but you realize these are amazing, amazing people, right? The kindest, happiest. Yeah, it's such an amazing experience.
I spent a lot of time in Portugal because I did the privatization of TAP, Portugal Airlines. So the first time I went there, I was in a cab driving to the government offices to meet with the ministers, and I couldn't hardly understand what the guy was saying because Portuguese is horrível. But
Yeah.
through kind of his crazy Portuguese, I asked him if he'd ever been to Brazil before, and he said, "Yeah, I've been to Brazil." I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "Well, I couldn't believe it." Well, what do you mean? Well, I was in Fortaleza, and there was all these people that were in abstract poverty living on the hillside, and they were so happy. He said, "Here in Portugal, we have everything, and we're miserable." So
Yeah.
I thought, well, that really sums up Brazil. There really are a lot of happy people that obviously there's misery there, and there's particularly now in southern Brazil, but their outlook on life is, and they're very spiritual people as well. And I think that probably helps with their happiness.
Yeah. I think you're
Sorry to
right.
interrupt you.
No. It's an amazing place. And yeah, I think everybody loves their mission, right? And grows to love the people that are there in their own special way. But for me, it's been, I've tried to keep in contact with different people. And like you said, it's amazing how we can live such vastly different lives. And then they're just happy, right? Happy. And they love the Savior and they find a way to find that happiness in their life. But
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody loves their missions, but I think Brazilian missionaries are kind of like I was talking to one of my colleagues at work one time, and he had served his mission in Holland, but he told me two of his brothers had served in Brazil. And I said, "How'd they like it?" And he said, "Oh, they're just like every other Brazilian missionary, return missionary. They're so arrogant. They think it's the best place on earth. They speak Portuguese. They eat Brazilian food. They just think they had the best mission of all and discount everybody else." And I thought, wow,
yeah,
that's kind of true. Is it
that
is.
sounds about
It's
right.
a great place to serve a mission for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So you grew up there, and I only served a mission there, but you kind of, didn't grow up there. You're born there, vacation there, served your mission there. And then like those experiences you're talking about, right, where you're exposed to some of the poverty and some of the people that are more humble. Did that change how when you moved there to kind of launch Azul, or the time you spend there and now, like, does that change how you, I guess, interact with people or how you live there?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing I learned about on my mission was if it's somebody who's cleaning the bathrooms at work and they're scrubbing the toilets, or somebody who's your CFO, you just treat them all the same. You treat everybody with love and kindness. And that's what I learned on my mission, that we're not really bad. In God's eyes, we're all equal. And I think in large part, we're going to be judged on how we treat others, particularly those that can do nothing for us. I think it's kind of the true measure of a person. We can all kiss up to people who we want something from or gives us status or whatever, but it's the humble, the poor in heart and the poor in spirit that Christ taught us about. How do we treat them and how do we value them? Because those are the people really that Christ and our Heavenly Father value more than really anybody. And so that's really, I think in large part, that's how we're going to be held accountable.
I have certain specific instances that I could look back on and I could say, I remember this, right? And it was super, super impactful in terms of treating people the way you're describing, realizing that, listen, we're all brothers and sisters. Doesn't matter where we land in life. Let's just be kind to one another. Do you have any specific stories or things that you remember? You're like, oh, that's when I really clicked in my head.
I don't know. I think it was just the whole experience. When you get to Brazil for the first couple of months, you're kind of in shock, right? You're in culture shock.
Yeah.
And that transformation of trying to compare everything in Brazil to what you left at home kind of melts away as you fall in love with the people and you see their hearts, that people who have nothing would scrape together whatever they have to cook, have you have a cooked meal of rice and beans and a little piece of chicken or something. So I think that really is, it just absolutely changes you for sure. And it makes you different. And there's hundreds of specific instances where you met people or they had an impression on you and they changed you. And that's really the defining characteristic of serving others. It's the great commandments: to serve God and to serve each other and to serve your neighbor. And that's what you can do as a missionary 100% of the time. You're constantly serving your companion or serving somebody else. And I remember when I left my mission president, who's still alive and living in Brazil, we have a WhatsApp chat group with all the missionaries. And I go a couple of days without seeing it. And there's 200 messages, inspirational messages of all these missionaries. Here we are 45 years removed from the experience, and they're still all connected and with our mission president. But when I sat down with him in my final interview, he said, Elder Neeleman, you're going to go home now. And for the last 2 years, you've been thinking about others. It's all about serving others and serving your companion. And you're going to have to switch now, and you're going to start thinking about yourself. You're going to go to school for you. You're going to do all this stuff. And I can promise you, until you can kind of pivot back and figure out how to serve others, you'll never find the same happiness that you've had for the last 2 years. And so make sure that you balance that. And as you're kind of doing everything for you, make sure that you can keep serving others. And so obviously you get married and have a bunch of kids. There's certainly lots of opportunities to serve, especially if you're running a company. You can kind of watch out for others as well.
What I find so interesting about this all is, David, you served in 70s, 80s?
78 to 80.
78 to 80. Spencer, you served in the 90s, whatever, both in Brazil. I served 2014, 2016 in Cambodia. And despite difference in time, despite difference in location, the experiences that each of us had are really they're almost identical. Everything that you're talking about of going into somebody's home and then not having anything, and yet they're buying you a sandwich and you're like, what are you doing? You don't have, that, or the importance of service, or some of these just really tentpole things. No matter where you are, if you do the program, even within the United States, my wife served in Florida, and we think that third world countries are crazy because they can be, but let her tell you some stories about what happens in Florida. And it's just crazy. And it's just if you sign up for the program, it's a universal experience, nearly universal experience, I would say, that you come away with these kind of knowledge of the importance of service and the goodness of humanity and some of those really deep and really abiding principles, things that you draw from for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
It's just
absolutely.
It's amazing that a 19-year-old, that 18-year-old, I guess, can sign up, and you can almost guarantee that you're going to have this life-changing experience just by virtue of taking a leap,
Absolutely.
It's pretty
because
fantastic.
The Spirit's there. The Spirit teaches, and it purifies you if you're doing what you're supposed to do. I have a Cambodia story. I was the ward mission leader in Connecticut, and one day I was at our local farmer's market, and a gentleman came up to me and said, my daughters know your daughters, and this is my little daughter, Chloe, here, and she's friends with your daughter, Vanessa. And I said, oh, nice to meet you. And so I just kind of went on my merry way. And then he tracked me down and he said, I got to tell you, I don't know what you guys are doing in your house, but it's working. I said, what do you mean? Well, when your daughter came over to our house, she wanted to bless the food, and she's like 10 years old. And then my little daughter, Chloe, goes over to your house, and she said you guys read the Bible every night, and it's really cool. I just want to let you know that. So I said to him, why don't you come? And then he started kind of bagging on his own church, saying, we don't get that kind of stuff at our church. And so I said, why don't you come worship with us? So he came and brought his 2 daughters and his wife. And over a period of about 5 years, they ended up getting baptized. And so there was Phoebe and Chloe. So Phoebe goes off to BYU, and she had been to EFY a couple times. And then Chloe was kind of the reluctant one. She didn't want to get baptized, but kind of a miracle happened where she went to her counselor at school, and her school counselor knew a member of the church and convinced her to get baptized. So Chloe goes off to BYU, and I'm like, I wonder how Chloe's going to like that experience. She's didn't really necessarily, it was kind of new. And so next thing I know, Chloe decides to go on a mission, and she gets called to Cambodia. So she went to
What's her last
Davis,
name?
Sister Davis.
Okay, I was there when she was there.
I followed her whole experience and read all of her emails because when I sat down with them, Chloe wasn't coming to church. So I sat down with her mom and dad and her sister was saying, I want to get baptized. And I said, well, Phoebe wants to get baptized. And they said, well, not without us. I said, what about Chloe? Oh, Chloe, she'll just get baptized. So Chloe got drug into to the church and went on a mission and had a tremendous experience in Cambodia. And then ended up meeting a guy who served in Thailand, and they got married and had a baby. And now they're living in New Hampshire and doing great. So that's my Cambodia story.
That is a good tie-in. Yeah, she's older than me in the mission, but
I was like,
we overlapped. So.
Cambodia? Are you kidding me? What are her parents going to say about that?
I know. They're like, we've renounced everything.
It's pretty funny.
We're out. Yeah, no, look, you guys can talk all you want about Brazil being the best mission, but I think we all know it's Cambodia.
Well, that's the gift that our Savior gives us. If you agree to serve, he'll make it that way.
So what would be your counsel to a returned missionary who once testified of the gospel of Christ and the power of the atonement, and now has come home and things change and they may be harboring some doubts about the things they once testified of? How would you counsel that person?
Yeah, I think I have 9 children and they're all strong in the gospel, all married in the temple. I've been so blessed. And I think part of it was during the time that I was a ward mission leader. I had a lot of people having dinner and I kind of inoculated my kids to a lot of this historical stuff that gets people all upset, which is kind of ludicrous. And so I think that helped a lot. But when I got my pastoral blessing and I was 18 years old, one of the phrases in my pastoral blessing said that your testimony you'll gain a testimony from seeing the lives of those who follow the covenant path versus those that do not, and the happiness that it brings to them. And I think when you read in Matthew 7 about by their fruits you shall know them, what I've come to believe, and obviously it's pretty disheartening when you have people who have been on a mission and testified of Christ and found a lot of happiness, and then through some historical thing, different versions of the first vision or polygamy or some of this stuff, they lose their faith. And the saddest thing about losing their faith is that the vast majority, maybe up towards 90%, not only lose their faith in the restoration of the gospel, they lose their faith in Jesus Christ and they lose their faith in God. And they are miserable. And they really are. And some could dispute that and say, oh, I'm not, I'm liberated, I'm happy, and I love wine and it tastes awesome and all that kind of stuff. But I just really believe that the true happiness of the gospel comes through following the Savior. And I've been watching this podcast. There's this podcast called Come Back Podcast. And the host is a young lady who left the church and had been through rehab, was a heroin addict, been through rehab 14 or 15 times. And then she came back to the church just by reading the Book of Mormon. At least one verse a day brought her back. And the joy that she has now versus the misery she had not living the gospel, she decided to share that with others, but also have others tell their stories. And I don't understand the vitriol against, I was sitting at sacrament meeting today, just the sweetness of that whole meeting. And we had a missionary farewell that was, the sweet sister was going to the church history sites in New York and then on to Canada. And I thought, wow, why would anyone be vitriolic about this? And I think there was a guy that was on the Come Back podcast and he went deep on the doctrine, went deep on the historical stuff. And he really wanted to know if Joseph Smith was a prophet or not. And he said at the time, finally got to the conclusion that it was a 50-50 proposition. And that, yeah, you can argue both sides and both people could argue it effectively. But he just decided he was happier following being in the church and raising his kids in the church than he was when he wasn't. And that was the determination. That was the determining factor that brought him back. And so I just think I wouldn't trade my church experience. And I really do feel sorry for those people that not only leave, but they're angry about it. And they feel like they were deceived or lied to. You're missing the whole point about the gospel and being a follower of the Savior and living after his principles. We're promised that if we do that, we'll find happiness.
I had a really great conversation yesterday. We had an elders quorum activity, and afterwards I was chatting with one of the brothers, and we were talking about the youth, right, and the challenges that the youth have. Talked about missions, kind of the whole gamut. But one of the things that he and I talked about was the desire that people have to feel something, right? And as you look around, I think that drives a lot of the different protests or the different things that people want to get involved in, and that they're trying to feel those things. And as I thought about it, I thought the gospel fills a lot of that, right? It really helps provide that direction. It provides that the feeling the Spirit will give you gives you so much. And I think all these other things, they may be good, they may be bad, but they pale in comparison to the gospel, right? And the feelings you can get from it.
Yeah, I mean, the anxiety, the depression, the suicide rate. So we have all this prosperity. I mean, today we were learning about King Noah and all of the way he kind of corrupted his whole society. And it was only 24 years after King Benjamin's address, where everybody was of one heart and one mind. So it's really easy to fall away. But then you're just really miserable. And everyone's searching for something today, and they just don't have, everybody tells you, you want to be happy in life, get up early, get some sunlight, go work out, eat good, and find meaning and purpose in your life. There's no greater place to find meaning and purpose in life than in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, with ample opportunities to serve and to take care of others and to learn great principles. And, I couldn't be happier. I shudder to think what my life would be like without that, and the lives of my children.
I think that going back to, like you said, it comes down to a choice of it's all either true or it's not. And to me, there's a lot of beauty in the struggle. Anything that is worth doing is hard. And go back to a mission. A mission's really hard, but it's worth doing. You think of stories throughout time. You think of fictional stories, Lord of the Rings. If they were like, look, Frodo, you just have to take this ring and go throw it into the mountain, but you're going to have a terrible time before you do that. And if he decided, you know what, too much work, you wouldn't have a story and there would be nothing to tell. And I haven't yet had a faith struggle, but I'm empathetic to those people who do. And I just think, man, if you have to choose one way to have your life go, choose the struggle, because there's beauty in the struggle. And I hope that they do that. But anyway, that's great to hear your perspective on that. So last question for you. What would be your top piece of advice that you would give a young kid who is questioning going on a mission and talking to 16, 17, 18-year-old kid? What would you tell them if you were to give any advice to them?
So the first thing I would say is prepare yourself spiritually so that you get that confirmation that you should go. Don't go because someone wants you to go. Because missions are hard and they're difficult, but they are life-changing and they will affect you for an eternity. So get your life in order, make sure that you're following the commandments, that you're doing all that you should do, and then prepare yourself for that answer. And when you get it, go. And if you do go, you're going to be there for 18 months or 2 years. It's just the way it is. I kind of had this feeling that if I was coming home, I was coming home in a pine box. I'm not going to, there's no way I was going to come.
Yeah.
So
You burned
and
the
it was
boats.
about 3 months in where I was homesick. And I just said to I was kind of crossing off the days on the calendar thinking, man, I've heard rumors they're going to shorten these things to 18 months. Wouldn't that be great to chop 6 months off of this thing and get home? And then all of a sudden I realized I'm going to be here anyways. I can be the best or I can just kind of be miserable. And so when I made that switch where I just said, I'm going to be the best. I want to just take advantage of every single moment of this mission. And my last 6 months were my best. And I kind of pity those guys that went for 18 months, actually. They didn't get the last 6 months. And that was when I spoke the language the best. I was assistant for the last 7 months. We were in a part of Brazil where we were up north, and with the whole revelation of, I got there in October of 78. The revelation came in June of 78.
Wow.
And so we were just like knocking on doors. Hey, we're here from the Church of Jesus Christ. We just arrived. And people were just like falling in the baptismal font. It was unbelievable. We were baptizing 2,000 people a month. And we were turning branches into stakes in 6 months. And it was a time, it was probably like England in the 1800s. And so because I just made that switch, I was able to participate in that grand miracle that was going on in the north of Brazil. And it was to look at other missionaries that were trunking their whole missions or basically weren't giving it their all. That was the advice I gave my kids. Just go out there and work every day your hardest. And the Lord, then it's kind of an upward spiral. The Lord blesses you and you have the Spirit with you and you love it. And then you get more into it and you have that life-changing experience. So don't go out half-baked. And then when you get there, just give it your all every day and the Lord will bless you. Absolutely. He's promised us that.
That's tremendous. Well, awesome. David, we'll let you go, but it's such a great opportunity for Spencer and I to meet you. I think you're such a humble person, and I love how you not shy away from your faith at all in your public persona, and I think that is really remarkable, and so somebody that I really admire. So thank you so much for your time and for doing this.
Great to spend,
Nice meeting
great
you,
to spend
David.
time with you, and come fly Breeze.
You know what? It's not that I know a lot of CEOs or get to talk to them all the time, but I have met my fair number in outside of the church, and I've met a few people who are fairly high up in their different organizations. My experience has been that many of the leaders that are church members are super humble. Like I went camping with a gentleman one time, and he and I are, my life and his life, totally different, right? I mean, when you've got as much money as this guy, it's so a lot of things are totally different. But he was the nicest guy, and he'd give you the shirt off his back. And while our lifestyles are different, at the end of the day, the core beliefs and the shared experiences are the same, and it bonds you, I think, to a certain degree.
Yeah, well, you also have the fact that it bonds you like horizontally, but it's also a tether, right? Like it tethers you to reality and it grounds you. And that's one thing that I kind of feel struck by talking to him is he's a very grounded individual. He's not too big for his britches. He understands what's important. And the gospel is a good reminder of that because you're going every single week and you're remembering your own, in the scriptural term, right, your own worthlessness before God, that you're like dust compared to God. And I think that's a great benefit of the church, just keeping that in mind and tethering you to reality and humility. And
Yeah, I think he said a couple things that I really loved. One that we didn't really like dive back into, but I kind of mentally noted it. And the other that I think we kind of touched on, but I love his thought process on Christ-like love, treating everybody the same. Not the same. Treating everyone with love and compassion, right? Treating them like a human. But then when he was talking about the gospel, one of the things he said kind of flickered in my mind was how you shall know them by their fruits. And I thought that's so true that's one of the things that the mission gives you, right? Is this ability to, if you're all in on the program, kind of like you said earlier, for doing it, what are the fruits? Love, compassion, kindness, expanded understanding of who different people are and cultures and societies. And in what world is that a bad thing?
right. Yeah, for sure. He said another thing that I noted when I asked about testimony as a missionary, and it was basically to the effect of, the way that I always phrase it for myself, I should say, is I've seen too much, and that's because of the mission. I think before my mission, I saw a lot. I mean, I had really good people around me. My parents are incredible examples. I have really great war leaders, but like, man, on my mission, I just saw so much, just many, many times daily examples of why I chose to believe this and why other people chose to believe it. And that really so much is the core of my testimony. And I say to myself, I've seen too much to let it slip away or to go somewhere else. I've seen people's miracles and I just have seen it over and over and over. And I've seen how happy it's made them. And like you said, that's a fruit. And I've just seen too much. And he kind of just mentioned that in passing too. And I think that's an amazing benefit from a mission that, again, if you're home, you're either not seeing as much or you're not looking for it as much. And a mission just puts it right there front and center and gives you the opportunity to treasure up all those things and store them for forever.
Yeah. You said at the very beginning, a mission it's all about failure. Success, yes, but it's a lot more failure than a success. And David is such a good example of that, like we said at the very beginning, right? This is an individual who was flying high, making millions when he was in his mid-20s, lost it all, right? Kind of up and down. But he's also that perfect example to say, like, listen, guys, this is what we talk about when we say, just keep going. You will be blessed. You don't know the plan. You don't know what God has in store for you, but it'll be great. It'll be awesome, whatever it is. And not everyone's going to be a David Neeleman, right? They're not going to, that's unique to him, but That doesn't mean that our lives will be any less amazing, just in different ways. And I think that's, like you said at the beginning, I think the ability to kind of muscle through that, you can get that outside of the mission. But I think that's one of the skill sets that I certainly brought home too, is say, oh, okay, well, keep moving, right? Just keep going.
Resilience, faith in the future. Those are principles that matter no matter if you're a CEO of a major company or you're a quote unquote nobody, that it's important. It's very important. So awesome. All right. Well, what a cool experience. That was so fun.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's super cool. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, that wraps it up. This is a great episode. Thanks to Spencer for coming on to help me out. And thanks to David for his time. And thanks everybody for listening. Tell a friend, fly breeze. We'll see you back next time.